There's this book called, it's just called The Excelsior Neighborhood, right? And it was put together, Arcadia Publishing put it together, and a photographer, a famous photographer in that neighborhood, took all these pictures, right? And the first like quote in the book is, "The Excelsior neighborhood, the place that people forget, exists." The Excelsior neighborhood is in the southeast area of San Francisco, near Daly City, and there's a large population of Filipinos there.
To me, the Excelsior it's definitely a thriving place. It still hasn't changed that much. It's definitely a blue-collar neighborhood still. There's a lot of migrants, more migrants that are noticeable for me when I come here. Whether they're legal, whatever, there seems to be more Asians also that have moved into the neighborhood, at least over the past 20 years.
I would definitely say it's known for being a diverse working class neighborhood, and more now it's being associated with immigrant populations.
When we first moved here, it was my wife and I, it was the mid 80s, about 86. And at that time, there was a transition going on. You still had a lot of Italians. You still had a mixed group of ethnics as far as Filipinos. There weren't that many Chinese, not that many Vietnamese, but you can see them moving in. There was Hispanics, not primarily Mexican, but say Salvadoranians, Puerto Ricans, Venezolanos, different groups. But there were always, at least that I remember, there were always a lot of Filipinos scattered.
Primary ethnic groups are Chinese, Hispanic, and Filipino. And I don't see them interacting as much as I would like to see. I've heard from individuals that are members of those particular groups that there isn't very much overlap in the efforts that they're doing to improve the community. And I think that definitely needs to be improved upon. There needs to be more of a concerted effort in this neighborhood and less division.
I believe that we need changes in our community, but we also need to think about, like what does our community really need? I've been working in the Excelsior district for about a decade, maybe a little longer than a decade. And when we first started there, it was tough, like I think there was already a large population of Filipinos there, but they had a lot of different concerns and issues that they wanted addressed, whether it be getting jobs or doing better in school, or dealing with whatever issues they had at home. I think that there was just nowhere to go.
I like working in the Excelsior. I like being in San Francisco, and being in this community in the Excelsior. A lot of people always say, "Oh, gee, it's a terrible place," or it's a lot of crime. But the thing is, it's like any other area. The people in the neighborhood, the people that shop here, that live here, and you get to see families grow up, their kids get older, and work with them. And a lot of the changes is I think we're one of the last businesses that has been here for a long time. With all the chains that are out there now. Before we used to have clothing store, hardware stores, dry cleaners, laundry. We had a camera shop across the street. A lot of clothing stores, and that's one area that Excelsior has changed. There are more restaurant. There aren't a lot of personal, or I should not say personal, but businesses that are hardware stores, florists, all that type of business. We had a bakery next door.
The largest market when I was living here was Cala Markets. And then Bell Market bought them out. It's equivalent to maybe Safeway, a small Safeway or a small Lucky's. Cala Markets, which is off of Mission and Silver, is now Manila Orientec. It's a Filipino, it's like Pacific Super or Ranch 99. So that just gives you a little flavor how the neighborhood has changed.
Most of our customers now are geriatric. We do have some younger families. Most of them are either Filipino, Spanish, or Chinese. And so it's one thing that's changed as the makeup of the Excelsior. When I first started working here, it was a lot more Italians and German and Irish. And the transition over the years, and there was a lot more Spanish, and that's kind of dwindled a little bit. Now you're seeing more Chinese and Filipino. And the other thing is now, another thing we're starting to notice is more younger families coming into the neighborhood, which is nice. It's like it's rejuvenating.
I work as the corridor manager for Excelsior Action Group. We do business retention and attraction and business technical assistance along Mission Street between Silver and Geneva. And before I moved out of the community, the Excelsior was probably, I'd say, a little bit more run down than it is now. There weren't as many efforts to beautify, weren't as many murals, it was a lot more graffiti. It was a little bit grimier and dirtier, even though those problems still exist.
So the stereotypes that we're fighting is that we are not an impoverished neighborhood. We are an underserved neighborhood, whereas city government sometimes will pour money into the Richmond or the Sunset District thinking that they need the most help, and because we're not really complaining because we're rolling up our sleeves and doing it ourselves, that, oh, well, that part of the city doesn't exist. So it's just ignorance on the part of people, or not being aware that services are needed out here as well.
Speaking of underserved, one of the things that really doesn't happen for us, I mean, like they're always trying to cut our bus lines, or saying, well, it doesn't make sense to have a bus that goes all the way up to the Excelsior Hill and all the way back down because, you know, who knows how many people it serves, and it's a lifeline to a lot of people. And if this is really a transit-first city, then you have to go up to the top of the hill for people. Otherwise, you're just condemning them to cars, because this is a steep hill. It goes up like a mile. Actually, I think we're surrounded by hills in all directions.
Yes.
Maybe not on Ocean. As also underserved topic is we have, I think, more than 50% of the children. I think that's right. And we have 5% of the children's services budget committed to the Excelsior. So this is the kind of thing when we say underserved. It's not just about us being poor folk. It has to do with us being pushed over folk.
I don't think it's high on their list. And I think, you know, when people come through here, it's just like they're going from point A to point B, and they don't stop to see what's actually in the, you know, on Mission Street in this area. And I think if there was a reason, or maybe more diverse businesses would help.
There's not as good a mix of businesses as I would like to see. There's definitely certain services and goods that you have to get in your car and leave the neighborhood for. For example, we don't have a gym, we don't have a pet store, we don't have a copy place.
Safeway, all these places, and big hardware stores, so it's tough for a small business to get started. So you see a lot more fruit stands or vegetable stands, and a lot of restaurants, and, you know, like now the dollar stores, seeing a lot of the dollar stores come up. So that's one way it's changed.
One of the biggest, well, there's two that I can think of, and they're linked to each other. The first one is just that we have a very high percentage of vacant storefronts along the corridor. It's difficult for businesses here to keep themselves going when they work at such low margins in a low-income community.
You know, for a while we had a lot of empty storefronts, and when you have empty storefronts, you have nobody. Also, it attracts homeless people, because usually they'll camp out in the doorways and stuff. So having a business here not only supports the community and the Excelsior, but the people that live here.
Another issue that's really huge is that a lot of the property owners along the corridor are absentee property owners. They don't live in the city, they don't care for their properties, they don't maintain them or try to fill them if they're vacant. And so that lack of investment is really hurting the corridor.
The area has to be more attractive to people to come here. And I think that's one thing the city needs to do as far as keeping streets clean and parking meter rates and all those things, is to make it more attractive, and people would maybe shop here more in this area. But it's going to be a long haul. I think the city's more concerned about 3rd Street and other areas.
Ideally, the work that I'm doing here will not gentrify the Excelsior. We have such a vibrant community here already, and we want to preserve that.
In my neighborhood, which is, so there's the Excelsior, and then there's another neighborhood next to the Excelsior called Crocker Amazon, which some people consider as part of the Excelsior. There's no grocery stores there. We have liquor stores all over the place, you know? And so some people think that, you know, by putting a grocery store that causes gentrification. For me, I think we need one really bad, you know? I think gentrification, when I think of that, it's really this, it can be really dramatic and really painful for a community. And I think when I think of gentrification, I think it doesn't think of the needs of the community. ever since the Filipino Community Center has been in the Excelsior, that there's just a lot more people gathering and organizing, you know, for whatever particular issues, whether that be issues specific to the Filipino community or issues of like political campaigns to try to get the mayor. I mean, like it's not necessarily just the Filipino Community Center, but it's the feeling that there's some that you can move together, that you can organize together, that's really influenced, you know, like the population there. And people feel more empowered, more feeling like they can determine their lives, which I think is a huge change.
What I'm hoping for is that new businesses, individualized business, small business, hardware stores, bakery, anything that will, you know, get people here. Plus, I like to see the whole corridor cleaned up, and plant some trees, you know, maybe a couple of benches here and there, just to make it more attractive.
In 10 years, people aren't going to think that way. People are going to want to live in the Excelsior. People are going to want to be there and want to go to school there. And I feel like that's important, you know, like that says a lot about the community in which we live. I also feel like the Filipino community is not dying in the Excelsior neighborhood. And I think that we're going to be a force that people will see as important.
Ideally, if I get my job done right, I see the Excelsior with a healthy mix of businesses, like some of the missing services that I discussed earlier. I see those needs filled. I'd like to see people walking along a beautiful, developed corridor to get whatever they need.
The goal for a lot of our work is not effective temporarily. It's trying to sustain something that is going to go beyond this generation. And so I'm hoping, you know, and you can't always see, you know, like dramatic change right away, but just knowing that people are willing to fight, you know, for what belongs to them, or fight for their actual ability to be humanized is big. And I think that that's something that is changing and that has been changing, and that we're really lucky that that's moving that direction.
I want a house built of old wood. You could paint it any color you like, just so long as I can live with you. I want a house built of old wood. You could paint it any color you like, just so long as I can live with you. I want a house built of old wood. You could paint it any color you like, just so long as I can live with you. I want a house built of old wood. You could paint it any color you like, just so long as I can live with you.